Listen, I approached this book with some horror. I was like,
horror is a strong word. I thought you were going to say
I know.
trepidation or something, but you went straight for horror.
I went straight for horror.
You could almost imagine that she would dispense with vast swathes of the history because she's already sort of set herself up with this fantastical premise, and it doesn't really matter if she sticks close to the history.
With Tudors and Nazis, there's good guys and there's bad guys, and they're quite obviously delineated. Roger Moorhouse, you are so far out of your comfort zone today that it is like that scene in Father Ted when the priests get stuck in the lingerie department. I am making you come with me to the Tudor court, and you're sitting there in your bunker with all your very Nazi-ish books very ostentatiously turned outwards.
Yeah. And not knowing quite what to do.
I know, right. So the reason we're going Tudor today, and we will talk Nazis as well, that you get all the greatest hits in this podcast. So one of my hats, I have a number of hats. One of them is as historical fiction critic at the Times, and I've just reviewed 2 books about Anne Boleyn that I think say a lot about our historical preoccupations, about historical fiction versus history, and about how history kind of is shaped and formed. And I thought we could have a brilliant discussion about it, and you're going to have to talk about Anne Boleyn.
It's really not that bad. It's okay. I have kind of done this. I mean, you're right. I have sort of landed on very much in the 20th century. But I do have a much broader hinterland, intellectually speaking. That sounds odd. Broader hinterland than it might at first appear. So it's fine. It'll be fine. But no, it's good. It's going to be good fun. It's going to be good fun. So we've got 2 titles, right, today that you've looked at. There is the Beheading Game, Rebecca Lehmann, and the House of Boleyn.
See, you can't get away from Berlin, even in the...
No, it's true. The House of Boleyn. By Tracy Borman. And they're sort of 2 extremes of the spectrum of, how you can do historical fiction, aren't they? So tell us about the 2 of them.
Yeah, amazing. So Tracy Borman, The House of Boleyn, did you see what I did there? Is a very kind of traditional historical fiction book. It's firmly rooted in Tracy Borman's brilliant and exhaustive knowledge of the period. She is, of course, has written extensively non-fiction about the Tudors and other early modern topics, and she is the chief historian at Historic Royal Palaces. And this is a quite traditional look at the entire Boleyn family, who are seen through the lens of the comings and goings at their house, Hever Castle, which she obviously knows very well. And what we get is a full picture of the whole family. So we've got Thomas Boleyn, who's a kind of new money guy rising very fast at the capricious courts of Henry VIII. He has 2 daughters and a son surviving. Mary, who isn't in it huge amounts, who is Henry VIII's mistress for a while. George, who is another rising star in the Tudor court. And, of course, Anne. So we see their grandmother, the children's grandmother. We see Thomas, who actually gets a much more sympathetic portrait than normal. Thomas Boleyn is normally portrayed as a sort of grasping, pushy kind of parvenu who wants his daughter, who's happily sacrifices his daughter's virginity for the sake of his own advancement. And that portrait is much more nuanced here. So that's The House of Boleyn by Tracy Borman. The other book is called The Beheading Game by Rebecca Lehmann. So in this book, Roger, Anne Boleyn has just been executed. Sorry, is that a spoiler alert for you?
Yeah, just a bit, Like, I didn't know that bit.
So, Yeah, sorry. So spoiler alert, Boleyn's head is rolling.
Yeah.
But in this version of the story by Rebecca Lehmann, she is sort of lying there headless after her execution, and she feels something sort of knobbly at her knees, and she reaches down and finds her head.
Yeah.
And then she picks it up, she walks about, she finds like a pub and there's a sewing kit, and she goes in and she's
What, like in the nightstand, as like one of those sewing kits in a Premier Inn.
Yeah, she sort of glosses over like
Precisely how this
she
happens.
well, also how like the head seeing things bit
Yeah.
works. I mean, there's
Yeah.
quite a lot that's glossed over. Anyway, so she sews her own head back on and sets off on a kind of quest, I guess,
Yeah.
to do two things. One is to protect her infant daughter Elizabeth, and the other is to get her revenge
Yeah.
on Henry VIII.
Yeah. So it's a sort of a revenge movie, really. It's a revenge tale.
It is. And I mean, listen, I approached this book with some horror. I was like,
horror is a strong word. I thought you were going to say trepidation or something, but you went straight for horror.
I went straight for horror. So listen, I've been reviewing historical fiction for the Times for about 15 years, some insane length of time. And I have read so many fictional representations of the Tudors, it's actually probably insane. I mean, I should be locked up. And I wasn't quite ready for zombie Anne Boleyn.
Yeah.
Although I'm not sure she is technically a zombie. I don't know how you define these things.
Yeah.
Whatever. Zombie?
Yeah. Well, I don't know. She's not really, is she? But yeah, sort of, I don't know, reanimated.
I mean, she's undead.
I don't know. Undead. Yeah. Yeah.
Undead.
Yeah.
Yeah, I didn't think I was ready for an undead Anne Boleyn, and I wasn't really. And I picked up the book out of. I don't know why. I think, I have a lot of books to review each month. Maybe it was desperation. Anyway, I actually loved it. It's so clever. It's kind of funny. It's beautifully written. Rebecca Lehmann is a poet, and it tells like the way
she is
writes
actually a poet. I mean, that's not just figuratively speaking, but she is actually a poet.
Well, she's a published poet, Moorhouse.
Yeah, okay.
I don't know what you want. I mean, how do you define a poet?
Yeah, yeah.
I don't know. It's a bit like defining a zombie. Like, at what point is a poet like actually a poet?
Or just someone that lies around.
Wow. Oh, you're just playing to all the stereotypes this morning.
Yeah.
Moorhouse. So, yeah, and actually she does a fantastic job. Like, it's very inventive, it's very playful. As Anne Boleyn, with her sewn on head, walks through London, you know, approaching the palace, she sort of muses on her relationship with Henry, and and all the backstory stuff is all quite close to the history. And actually Rebecca Lehmann has very interesting things to say about marriage and power dynamics within marriage, and what power dynamics within marriage look like when somebody is an absolute monarch. These are really interesting issues that she plays with. And then there's funny bits, like she's approaching bits of London where people know what Anne Boleyn looks like, and they get completely freaked out. They're like, oh my God, it's the ghost of Anne Boleyn. And she plays to that, and it's quite funny. So I found it incredibly well done and affecting and moving, and I enjoyed it as much as anything I've read this year, if not a little bit more. The last book I think that I enjoyed, I kind of relished so much, was Joe Harkin's The Pretender, which I gave rave reviews to, and now pleasingly is like everywhere, and it's book of the year or whatever in Waterstones, and it's like getting some real guns.
I saw, because you gave that a good plug. Yeah.
I've been banging the drum for that one a lot.
Yeah.
So I really, really loved this. And I also really enjoyed Tracy Borman's take. I thought it was incredibly well done. She knows her stuff, and much more traditional and close to the sources.
Yeah. I mean,
obviously, because
like
there's
I said,
no
sort of,
undead.
Yeah, and no, people struggling along down the road with their head under their arm. I mean, they are, like I said, they're two sort of extremes of the historical novelist's art in a way, at two ends of the spectrum. Pros and cons of both. I mean, there's this sort of historical fiction like Tracy Borman's effort there, which is so close to the reality. It almost blurs, right? I mean, there are things that you can do, obviously, in terms of characterization and speech and all of that sort of thing, and emotion that you can bring out, which can be informed by your historical knowledge, but is not there in the sources. So you can play with stuff that you can't necessarily do in a history book. But then the other end of the spectrum, you've got the Beheading Game, which is, you may as well fly Anne Boleyn to the moon. I mean, it's kind of way off, the other end of the spectrum. So pros and cons. I mean, how do you sort of feel about those as approaches?
So as a reader, I really hate historical fiction that takes too many liberties.
Yeah.
Which is why I approach the Beheading Game with, worries.
Yeah.
As a critic, I kind of have to look at the books on their own merit and not be too wedded to my own personal preferences, because as long as it's clear what the writer's trying to do, who they're writing for, and then you take it on its own terms. Has it achieved that, right? And my own preference is always for the very close to the history. I mean, you still have to make your choices, right? So even though you're close to the history, you still have to make choices that historians don't have to make. So here's an example. Was Anne Boleyn playing Henry VIII and kind of fending him off coquettishly for years in a sort of clever game to persuade him to marry her and become queen? Or was she genuinely not interested in becoming his wife because she saw who he was, she wasn't that fussed, and she was just trying to escape a trap, and the trap was his overbearing and sort of almost manic love for her, which she knows is likely to dissolve. It's likely to destroy her, but also likely to dissolve as soon as he actually gets her, right? Because he's all about the chase. So you still have to make choices like that as a novelist, whereas as a historian, you can just say, this is what happened. Would you have to choose between those two? Probably you'd have a view, but you would, you'd probably elide it a little bit. Tracy Borman, in writing the novel, has to come down on one side or the other, and she comes down on the second camp. This Anne does not want to be married to Henry VIII. This Anne is kind of twisting like a kind of, I was going to say an eel in a trap. I don't know. An eel's trapped?
On a hook?
Whatever. On a hook? I don't know. Whatever. And the choices she makes are really interesting. And that's one of the reasons, I think, and we'll come back to this, is one of the reasons why I think people buy... When you first start out as a writer of both history and historical fiction, you assume that people will buy books about stuff they don't know stuff about, right? You think, I'll write about something very obscure because nobody else has done it, and that's brilliant. No. And then the longer in the tooth you get, the longer you've been in the game, you realise that people don't buy that many books, and when they don't want to make a mistake, and they prefer to buy books about stuff they already know a little bit about, right? So if you've read lots of fiction about Anne Boleyn and lots of history about Anne Boleyn, you're going to love Tracy Borman's book, because you are going to be like, I know this story, I see the choice she's made, that's really interesting, and your pleasure in the story is enhanced and intensified because you already know the bones of it.
Yeah. Just to go back to the two books again, that Rebecca Lehmann, The Beheading Game, does that, I mean, in a sense where, given that she's got this sort of fantastical premise, right? you could almost imagine that she would dispense with vast swathes of the history, because she's already sort of set herself up with this fantastical premise, and it doesn't really matter if she sticks close to the history as it is. But nonetheless, is it clear that at least she's done the homework, she's done the hard yards, she knows the period pretty well?
Absolutely. And in fact, funnily enough, her Anne is the more kind of deliberating, coquettish one. You know, she also is squirming a little. I mean, Henry is monstrous in both books.
Yeah.
But Henry is more attractive to Anne in the Beheading Game initially, and she feels intoxicated by his power of both personality and, literal power. So yes, absolutely. When she touches on the real history, it feels like any other authentic historical fiction book. It feels like she's done the work, she's done the homework, and it's a nuanced, interesting interpretation of the sources.
Yeah.
Now, when I kind of was wibbling a bit before, but this question of whether I prefer stuff to be close to the truth, I actually really also loved Rebecca Lehmann's book because it was kind of so inventive and playful. What I don't like is the ones in between, I guess, that purport to be close to the history but actually aren't, and you'd only know if you know it, but otherwise, if you're a kind of casual reader, you don't know, and it feels authentic, but it's about as authentic as,
Yeah. Anne Boleyn on the moon. Yeah.
Anne Boleyn on the moon, right.
Yeah.
And I think the Beheading Game works so well because the history is good and the fantastical is good and the world building of them both together works marvelously.
Yeah.
So yeah, it's a really interesting thing that like them side by side.
Yeah.
Anyway, why do you toil away, Roger Moorhouse, at the coalface of Nazis, day in, day out.
Yeah,
Nazis to the
it's
left
a toil,
of
I
you,
tell
Nazis to the right of you. But why are some historical periods like the Nazis, like the Tudors, and it's not just about what people do in school, because it outlives that, it outlasts that. This is what we can see looking at the kind of bestseller charts. Why do certain topics sing and others don't?
I think it's partly what you were saying about readership, as to a large extent, is that, like you, I mean, that what you just described is that when you start off in this business, you imagine that readers are, in a sense, as adventurous as you are as a writer, that and intellectually curious as you are, and they're willing to go outside their comfort zone. But the reality is that the
just
vast
to be
majority...
clear, our listeners are
of course, absolutely. But they're a cut above anyway. They're a cut above it. We know this. We know
You're
this.
Self-selecting crowd.
Yeah. But so most people like you, they will read everything there is, to know about, whether it's the Nazis or, my particular bugbear is the Dam Busters raid. There's really nothing that we need to know more about the Dam Busters raid, but every year there'd be another, at least 6 books, essentially saying the same thing in a repackaged way. And that, I just, I find that quite boring. But, there's a market for it. People will buy those books because they've read everything else. So to some extent, it's that. I think, the comparison that sort of most sort of shocking away and sort of galling as well is between, Nazi Germany and the Soviet Union. Then had the extent to which sort of Soviet history just doesn't get the column inches or the interest or the advances that Nazi Germany does. You can kind of produce almost anything at all on the Nazis, regurgitative. We all know examples of that, and it'll be published and it'll probably do reasonably well. But it's much harder to get something away on the Soviet experience, which I think is actually as interesting. because it just doesn't have that sort of resonance. It just doesn't really fly in the same way. And the Tudors is a weird one, isn't it? Because it is all about, I suppose, to some extent, to the British mind. And I don't think it necessarily translates. It doesn't go beyond the British audience, does it? I mean, Tudors don't really sell in the US, for example. I don't think. I mean, I'll be proved wrong on that.
I think they probably sell better than other English. I mean, you're more likely to get a book away on the Tudors in the States or film away on the Tudors than you are on, say, Charles the First, aren't you?
Yes, I suppose. Yeah. But I was coming around to, I suppose, in the British historiography. I mean, you can look at the Tudors as they're relatively self-contained. It's a sort of it's a century and a bit. It has big characters. Henry VIII is enormous, obviously, both literally and physically, and is fascinating with his 6 wives. I mean, it's got everything, isn't it? It's got a sort of that figure right at the heart of it. It's got the religious element to it. It's got the precariousness of establishing a new dynasty with Henry VII. And then you've got the precariousness of having women on the throne who are trying to defend themselves against, outside forces and inside treason and all the rest of it. So it is a period that's kind of got everything, isn't it?
I suppose there's a reason though why Henry VII. There are, name the novels about Henry VII. He's a kind of dry, kind of figure who just has one wife, a couple of sons.
Doesn't even kill her. I mean,
doesn't even kill her. Works hard. And actually, Henry VII historically is unbelievably incredible and significant. He's a minor figure who manages to kind of capture the throne and he
lays the groundwork for everything that follows. I mean, he is a really remarkable monarch.
Right. So I think it's sex, I'll be honest, Moorhouse, with the Tudors.
Yeah.
Because I think, the reason we're not so interested in Henry VII as Henry VIII is because Henry VIII's reign is one of those rare moments in history where somebody's sex life directly impacts the politics of the whole of Europe.
Yeah.
And I just think...
And you're not just talking about Anne Boleyn and her French ways.
No, not Anne Boleyn and her French way. I'm astonished that's like literally all you know about her, Roger Moorhouse. That she has French ways. Yeah, well, okay, fine. I mean, let's put it like that. So, Henry VIII's addiction to Anne Boleyn's French ways, blowjobs, right? So,
God, you didn't have to spell it out.
Blowjobs, but these are blowjobs that change the course of history.
And when else can you say that?
Literally, name another blowjob in history that has had as great an impact, that has caused a reformation, dissolutions of the monasteries, the kind of schism with Europe. I mean, that is a seriously good blowjob.
I mean, that's a PhD right there, isn't it? Surely someone's got to be doing that.
Yeah, probably. And also, I think, more seriously, I mean, although I was being quite serious, it's the point at which kind of familial politics are also geopolitics. So it's like, I always think it's a similar reason why the Julio-Claudians, for example, have the kind of lingering cultural capital that they do, is because it's their lives which are colourful and full of incident and full of divorces and misery and madness and people being beheaded or whatever. Those familial relationships are also the political relationships. The same with the Borgias or the Medici, right? Where you get family politics dictating bigger kind of geopolitical movements. I think that's where one of the ways that a history really takes off. And actually with all of those periods and people, it's quite often historical fiction as much as history, which is driving that kind of cultural resonance, I would
Yeah, yeah.
argue.
Yeah, so I mean that's a good point. I mean, how the extent to which I was thinking about this the other day. I mean, bear in mind, Shakespeare did a lot to shape, our understanding of not necessarily of this period, but going back a little bit to Richard III and so on. But he's essentially a historical novelist, right? He's reframing
Yeah.
those, not with a knowledge of the history, but also with a need to entertain, with a need to inform to some extent, also misinform. But he was essentially a historical novelist. So, but then if you jump forward now, a lot of our understanding of that period of the ordinary person is kind of maybe Shakespeare and probably nothing else, right? So there's a tremendous duty really on those historical novelists as to kind of get it slightly right if possible, or is that not important? Can they sort of jettison that side of things and just kind of tell a good tale?
Oh, that's a difficult question. I think their first and ultimate responsibility is to the novel form,
Mm.
is to the fiction, not to the history.
So to entertain.
To entertain, to get people to read. I mean, and hopefully it's a gateway drug, right?
Yeah.
So, I read Dermot McCulloch's brilliant biography of Thomas Cromwell after I'd read Wolf Hall. Would I have read his book had I not read Wolf Hall? Possibly. Probably, yeah, I would, because I'm into that shit, but other people might not have done. And so I think that's, and also because of it popularizing things. I mean, one interesting thing. So I wrote a couple of novels set during the English Civil War, which failed dismally. But not hardly any novels work during the English Civil War because I guess, and this is Tudors and Nazis. With Tudors and Nazis, there's good guys and there's bad guys, and they're quite obviously delineated in ways that make fiction quite easy, that make kind of cultural representations quite easy. Even when you're playing with it, like if you're playing with the trope, like the good Nazi or the sort of, or whatever, it's still within a framework of a world that's quite Manichaean.
Yeah.
Whereas
And
the English
immediately
Civil War,
understandable as well. Yeah.
yeah, exactly. Whereas the English Civil War, like effectively, the good guys are very, very boring and into really tedious things like predestination and God, and it makes for and they're fighting over things that are really complicated and feel very arcane and stupid to a modern audience, and the kind of and also the sort of more glamorous, exciting side of the English Civil War fault line is the kind of Cavaliers, but to kind of modern sensibilities where we're, we don't like kind of exuberant posh boys in the same way as we maybe once did. It's hard to, allow them to be the protagonists either. So there's so what you get is a kind of messy melange of people there are lots of reasons to not like, rather than a kind of,
Yeah.
simple, here's Henry, he's fat, monstrous, and he smells bad.
Yeah. And has a nasty habit of killing his wives. But yeah.
And has a nasty habit of killing his wives. Yeah. So
He's not the good guy, by the way, audience, just so we know.
Mrs. Moorhouse is relieved to hear you say so there. Brilliant.
Yeah.
Well, listen, I would tell you to read them, but you're not going to. So
Well, I do I've got a pile of books here. My TBR pile is literally about 12 high next to me here. So,
I know, and including some books. We're going to return to your happy hunting grounds, aren't we?
We are.
Next episode.
Hooray.
Where are we going next time?
We're going to Weimar. Both in the wider sense of the Weimar Republic and also in the narrower sense of the city of Weimar itself.
So if you've been, traumatized by hearing me and Roger talk about Anne Boleyn's French ways. We'll be back on safer ground next time. So don't forget, follow, subscribe, wherever you get your podcasts, and we'll see you next time.
Bye.